Fault Lines.
Coming up, we're going to have Tom Whitmore. Now, Tom Whitmore is a former financial analyst and currently a senior board member of MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, a U.S.-based nonprofit organization composed of civilian volunteers who study reported UFO sightings. Now, this is one of the oldest and largest organizations of its kind, claiming more than 4,000 members worldwide. Now, I contacted Tom because this is a topic close to my heart. It's something that I am fascinated by. I don't quite understand why more people are not more fascinated by it. We're a ball hurling through space. That is the thing that's real. And just like we look up in the cosmos and ask, are we alone? Is there anything out there? And we send out probes and everything else. Why wouldn't something else do the same? Now, you think of the size of the universe.
Amazon.
Excellent. You think of the size of the universe, you think of all of those things, and you get to the point of saying, maybe there is something out there like us. And MUFON has been one of the earlier networks, basically, to record that information. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having me.
I was excited to bring you onto the show. Can you give us just a basic primer on what MUFON is before we go forward?
MUFON is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. It was started around the time of 1969, 1970 by Walt Andrus and John Schuessler, John Schuessler is still involved with MUFON to this day. We have a volunteer organization of a number of field investigators, state section directors, and state directors that investigate UFO sightings and reports. We have a board of directors of 7 to 9 people, and we have an executive director and an office manager. We also have an operations officer and a chief investigator. Almost everyone involved in MUFON is a volunteer. I'm on the board myself, and I'm a volunteer.
Excellent.
We only have a couple of paid positions. So what we do is we receive sighting reports, and those reports are then assigned to investigators, and investigators then go in and interview the witnesses and file reports.
Now, how, over the past year, let's say maybe 2 years, I've been fascinated by the speed at which this topic has gone from the slight giggle factor to, oh my God, this is serious. And you have Tom DeLonge, you have the videos that were released by the Pentagon, you have Luis Elizondo, you have the New York Times, CNN, Washington Post, you have all of these publications all of a sudden realizing this is real. And not just real, now real, but also real going back for 50, 60, 70 years or so. How has your life or your perspective of this been altered, changed? I mean, because you're in MUFON, you're in an organization that's been looking for this stuff for years, for decades. And now all of a sudden, in a very short span of time, you've had relevance and legitimacy almost endowed to the point where Congress is now going to have some kind of congressional hearing on the information that was basically being put out by government sources.
Yes, and it's been a long road. In the 50s and 60s, and even part of the 70s, the mainstream media, and back then you had print media, they actually paid attention to UFO events. They paid attention to UFO sightings. And then in the 70s and 80s and 90s, there was some kind of blackout on UFO reporting in the mainstream media, and there was very little attention paid to it. Now, Tom DeLonge came along, and he, as you know, is a well-known rock star, and he's very popular, and he apparently was able to go through a couple of iterations with some top people, both in the military and in private industry, and they came up with a plan to bring this UFO subject to the attention of the public. Now, it's my impression that Tom DeLonge and his organization, TTSA, that at least their initial target was the younger generation. And so Tom DeLonge is capable of appealing to that. Now, at the same time,
wait, Tom, real quick, I just want to ask you. This is Shane. Thank you for joining us. You mentioned Tom DeLonge, co-founder of Blink-182, like you're saying, prominent rock star, Blink-182, massive band. Do you have any sense of why he got into it? Again, you're not him.
He was
but
just
do you have
interested.
Any sense of what his commitment or involvement was?
Yeah, he was just interested.
It's hard to say because I know that he's been interested in the UFO subject for a long time. And some people that are interested in the subject, sometimes they make contacts through their own network of friends and associates, and occasionally people are approached. I don't know exactly how he came on to communication with alleged General McCaslin, who is alleged to have some very high-level relationships with the UFO subject, and And also, this led to his interview at, I believe, at a major aerospace company.
Yeah, he was interested in the subject, and he was able to ingratiate himself to various people in the political space, and they brought him in and gave him information on this stuff, and he was able to get the information out. I guess
he's the one truly unpredictable. I just wouldn't have expected government agents, people coming out of the government. That makes sense. People come out of different places to blow whistles or speculate on things. It's just he's the one person who's truly apparently coming out of nowhere.
It's phenomenally bizarre.
I just thought I'd ask. Anyway,
no, it is phenomenally bizarre. You're not the only one who says what. What is a rock star doing in the middle of this? But no, he associated himself with all sorts of government sources, and he came out. Is there any level of distrust because of that? I mean, for example, I've seen Luis Elizondo give speeches. Luis Elizondo was a person who's headed up the program ATIP. He's been giving interviews. He was on CNN at one point giving an interview. She said, "Do you think we're being visited?" He says, "Based on my scientific observation in this program, not just these videos, but multiple, the answer is yes." Very clear, unequivocal. And so he is out there giving lectures and whatnot. Do you trust this? And understand why I'm asking this. Because the government basically has been cagey about the UFO stuff for decades. And now all of a sudden you have what seems to be a push to get this information out. I mean, Hillary Clinton had the book, the UFO book that she was famously seen with. You had Obama's person, I can't think of his name right now, it'll come to me, but basically saying the UFO subject was the one that I couldn't open the books, and that's, my greatest shame or something to that effect, or that's my greatest failure. So it seemed like that there is a push for this. And then you have the videos come out. You have the Pentagon legitimizing the videos, saying, yes, we put these videos out. These are from our stockpile. You have the Army working with To the Stars Academy, an organization that is explicitly there to study UFOs and to basically get information out about UFOs. Did any of you come up with the thing of why now and why this level of push? I mean, even Unidentified, the television show that came out, again, getting it out, legitimizing this very specific issue seemingly all at once. Do you trust this? And if not, why? And if so, why? I guess I'm asking in both terms.
The thing is, there has been a lot of behind-the-scenes activity for years, okay? And during the 1990s, there's a person from the Rockefeller family, and he was interested in UFOs. And there's also this gentleman who's the Crown Prince of Liechtenstein. And there are some other large donors and people involved in this. But Mr. Rockefeller got in touch with the Clintons, and actually they visited with him at his ranch. And apparently they had some pretty extensive discussions about UFOs, and it was private. And what I'm getting at is that Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, John Podesta,
that's him,
was interested in UFOs.
That's him.
And Mr. Podesta has publicly stated that he wasn't able to get at the information that he's wanted to, but I think there are connections there. And during the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2016, she mentioned UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena.
Just to interject for one moment on that point, in the Clinton leaks. One of the things that people miss sometimes that Grant Cameron did, he's a UFO guy, are the UFO references. And the UFO references are astonishing because it legitimizes Tom DeLonge in regards to his contacts. But Clinton wanted to be asked the question about UFOs, and she was pushing various media outlets to ask her. And when I think it was Jimmy Kimmel, if I'm not mistaken, or Fallon, one of those two, where they asked her and they were glowing behind the scenes saying, yes, great answer. She finally answered it, UAPs, etc. Like, so you're right. It was stuff going on behind the scenes with the campaigns and whatnot. I guess it just seems that all of this is happening all at once in a very short period of time. And how do you foresee this developing? I mean, you've been in the UFO field for a while now, and it seems to have taken off in a very short span of time. Where do you see this going?
Yeah, well, I'm kind of an old hand in UFOs because I got active in the early 90s, and I've been with MUFON. I've been on the MUFON board since 1995. So we old UFO hands like me have seen these trends come along where people expect a lot of disclosure.
Yeah.
And we've gotten kind of cynical about that. When people get all excited about some huge disclosure, we tend to brush it off. Now, this situation is a little bit different because, like you've noted, Tom DeLonge has been very successful in getting public attention. There has been work on the congressional level with Luis Elizondo and Christopher Mellon, who is a high-level person, has been a high-level person in DOD and in congressional staff, and they have been working with the Senate Intelligence Committee, and the Senate Intelligence Committee is now expecting a report every 6 months from the Department of Defense. Now, I believe that Elizondo and Mellon have been successful in putting pressure on the Navy, at least, to start taking UFO reports seriously and making them a part of the regular record of naval activities when pilots report these things and so on and so forth. And because of that, there are some one or more DoD policies on UFOs, that are either being written now or have been written. So there have been these developments, but you'll notice if you watch closely, you hear nothing from the Air Force. And we've had UFO investigators, documentary investigators, attempting to get information from the Department of Defense about this ATIP program and the OSAP program, and it's like pulling teeth. So I think what I'm trying to say is I think there is some progress being made in getting more information from the military side out to the public, but at the same time, they're having to drag this information out of them and put pressure behind the scenes.
Let me ask you this. Do you think let's do this. Let's take a break, and we're going to come back. And I want to get into this notion of, do you think it's us? Because it's either us or it's not. There's no in between on that. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're here with Tom Whitmore, former financial analyst, senior board member of MUFON. We'll be back in a moment.
We're talking about UFOs. We're talking about a bunch of different sides of this. When we went into the break, Tom, I'm gonna put it like this. Often when people are talking about UFOs, they're talking about aliens, and this sort of gets lumped into conspiracy theories. A related conspiracy theory has to do with sort of psychic phenomena, and I think that was just exhibited by Jamarl, who read my mind and asked you exactly the question that I'm sure is on everybody's mind. In your opinion, but I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction. I'm going to add one other side in it too. In your opinion, but also in the opinion of MUFON, the official opinion of the Mutual UFO Network, how would you explain this? If you're looking at unidentified flying objects, which are undeniably a thing, do you see this as aliens? Do you see this as a government program? What's your opinion? And then what's MUFON's official opinion? Tom?
I would like to say that MUFON does not have an official stated opinion on what UFOs really are. Now, I will say that the general trend of thought with people that are in the UFO field, the general trend is to think that they're extraterrestrial in origin, but we don't have any proof of that, and we don't really even have any solid evidence of it. And there are a number of different theories about the origins of UFOs, as I'm sure you're aware. Anything from time travelers to interdimensional to even religious type entities to extraterrestrial, or just some kind of social phenomenon. Now, my personal opinion is that the phenomenon is truly anomalous, and it seems to me to be common sense that it would be extraterrestrial in origin. But again, I'd like to say that I don't have any proof or even any direct evidence of that. Now, there have been sightings of craft, particularly triangular-shaped craft, that people have seen in the United States and in Europe, and there's suspicion that some of those might be of man-made origin. And there's generally a sentiment in the UFO field and in people that follow these kinds of things that the technology that the military and the government has secretly is somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 years ahead of what we see publicly. So we have to hold out that possibility.
Right. And I think the most interesting part is just there may be a scientific discovery that may be understood by current scientists right now, but that if you look at it from outside of itself, looks exotic. Like, and I think that's one of the most interesting parts. For example, if there's some understanding of gravity that takes place, where you can somehow generate like electrogravitics, where you can somehow generate gravity based on some kind of electrical principle that allows us to control that. Well, those craft will look pretty exotic in the way that they may move, in the way they may even look from somebody who's outside of that didn't necessarily know that existed. And that may be, like you said, 20 years ahead, meaning there may be a horizon where you hit that and all of a sudden, it looks different. But again, that gets to this whole thing. It's either us or it's not. And if it's us, it gets even a little bit weirder, because that would mean that there was a second tract of technology that has taken place that the society is almost completely unaware of, that is using some kind of physics that the society also is not necessarily aware of. Let me ask you this. Let's go with the ET example, for example. This is where Luis Elizondo have kind of made this argument himself, and even going far to say we understand the physics of the craft, whether or not we can build something that can exhibit the physics or not. How do you view him? And how does the UFO community view him? I mean, this is somebody who's basically coming out of government and is saying some pretty mind-blowing things in regards to their experiences and how he ran the program. I know you say you've been through these periods before where it feels like it's come and gone, but it does feel different this time, right?
Yes, there's definitely more mainstream media attention being to it now. And you may have noticed, you may have seen this recent New York Times article that came out. Some top New York Times reporters working on this subject. So right. It is different in that respect.
Does it concern you, looking at our political situation now and adding in UFOs to it?
Well, one of the sentiments is that DeLonge and company, TTSA, were planning on really going much further with this faster because they were expecting Hillary Clinton to be elected to the presidency back in 2016. And that didn't happen. So that kind of threw a monkey wrench into their overall plan. And I think the perception from part of the UFO community is that TTSA has promised more than they've delivered. We have seen those 2 or 3 videos that they've come out with, and we've heard about their contract with the Army. And you're asking if I have any suspicions or concerns about them. I personally don't. And I think I can't really speak for the UFO community, but my perception is that generally the UFO community is trusting of TTSA, but there is a minority of people that are suspicious of TTSA. And the reason for that is partly the idea that you all expressed, that how is it that Tom DeLonge, of all people, is running all this? And then secondly, you have people of government origin.
Right.
Luis Elizondo, who is in counterintelligence, and Chris Mellon, who's served in the Department of Defense, and you have Jim Semivan, who has a CIA background, and he has Steve Justice from
Right.
Lockheed.
So you see where I'm coming from with this. Like even the defense thing. Like how do you get a huge amount of money to build under their model a craft? Like all of this comes almost from the standpoint of defense, and I think that's the part that gets me a little, let's say, it's a bit disconcerting because I've heard Tom DeLonge make statements about threats and those type of things from outer space, and if it goes in that direction, I guess in your explaining that, you understand where people are coming from with that, but you don't have those concerns.
I personally don't. I mean, we're all entitled to our own opinions. There are some people in the UFO world that feel that anyone from the intelligence community cannot be trusted. And this goes back to ultimately it goes back to the 1950s and 60s in the problems that the UFO groups had in communicating with the Air Force. But this mistrust of the government goes back directly to the 1980s during the MJ-12 affair and the relationship that Bill Moore, who was a prominent UFO researcher at the time, the relationship that he had with Richard Doty, who was a special agent for the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. And it became apparent that there was manipulation going on, that there was a certain amount of disinformation going on. And I've actually just published a paper on my blog that's titled MJ-12, The Counterintelligence Angle. It's on my blog, tomwhitmoreblog.wordpress.com, and it goes over some of these issues. And I think that at least a minority of the UFO public is suspicious of this because some of these people have government backgrounds.
Interesting. That's fair. That's fair. I appreciate that. I mean, basically, it seems like a turn, and the turn seems so sudden in regards to putting it out. It's like the difference between confirmation versus the government coming out saying, here's the body, here's so-and-so, Donald Trump saying vote Trump, and then leaving. What would be a hedge on this? What with the hearings and the items that are coming in the next few months or whatever? Marco Rubio made the point of saying, hopefully it's not from here. His point being, if it is from here, and the technology that is being exhibited, it would be a dramatic escalation in regards to the capabilities of somebody else, some other civilization on this planet. So his point was, hopefully it's not us. Our government has engaged the world in a particular way. And my concern in all of this is that in this kind of area of shadows where we don't necessarily entirely understand what's going on in general, meaning the way our government engages around the rest of the world, a lot of that stuff is hidden, that you've added an X factor to it of something else. And you have the public itself, to some degree, freaking out over that. Do you think that was part of the reason that basically this was one of the subjects that was held off the table for the longest time? Because it's such an unpredictable factor, meaning either in how the public engages it, how the public responds to it, all of those things. And because all of those things are up for grabs, it was just better to just keep it off the subject matter. What changed?
Well, there are a number. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. I was finishing. I was just saying, what changed? I mean, because if that's the case, if that was the reason why this was kept off the table, why is it now brought back with such force?
Well, there are several things that have been going on. The Air Force was very much involved in the public side of communication on UFOs in the 1950s and 1960s. And the Air Force hated it. They had to field all of the public questions and concerns concerning UFOs, and they got out of the business in the late 60s through the Condon Report, which basically came to the conclusion that there was nothing to UFOs. And the Air Force has pretty much stayed out of the whole UFO question. And like I mentioned before, there was basically a news blackout on UFOs in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Now what has changed? I'll say this. There are factions. Now, the Department of Defense is a very large organization, and there are factions in there. There is a faction, and Luis Elizondo has stated this himself, of high-level military people and intelligence people that believe that UFOs are demonic in origin and that we should have nothing to do with it. He's complained about that. But there apparently is a faction within the Department of Defense that feels that more information about what the government knows about UFOs should come out. And maybe that's part of what's going on.
Wow, that's terrifying. Oh, Tom, that's so terrifying. Because that takes it to a religious element. Like, that's some phenomena that's being experienced. And they immediately jump to this religious angle of we should not want nothing to do with it. Tom, I want to really thank you for coming on to the show, man. I really appreciated this conversation. You guys have been listening to Tom Whitmore, former financial analyst and currently a senior board member of MUFON, a U.S.-based nonprofit organization composed of civilian volunteers who study reported UFO sightings. It is one of the oldest and largest organizations of its kind, claiming more than 4,000 members worldwide. Also, you guys have been listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. This is the end of the week. I want to